Imagine a paradise island, bathed in the Aegean sun with pristine white buildings clinging to dramatic cliffs. This is Santorini, a jewel of the Greek Isles. But what if I told you that beneath this modern-day paradise lies the story of a lost civilization, a Bronze Age metropolis swallowed by one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in human history? Today, we journey back in time, more than 3,500 years, to the island then known as Thera, and uncover the incredible story of the Minoans who called it home in their mysterious disappearance. Before it was Santorini, it was Thera, a round island thriving under the influence of the great Minoan civilization. At its southern tip lay a bustling port town we now call Akrotiri. This wasn't some primitive settlement. Akrotiri was a marvel of ancient urban planning, a city so advanced it continues to astound archaeologists today. Picture this: streets paved with stone leading to grand multi-story buildings. Some homes stood 3 or even 4 floors high, built with a sophisticated mix of stone and timber framing designed to withstand earthquakes. This was Bronze Age engineering at its finest. Inside these homes, the level of comfort and artistry was remarkable. They had running water. An intricate network of clay pipes brought fresh water into the buildings and carried away waste in a surprisingly modern drainage system. Think about that for a second. While much of the ancient world was still figuring out basic sanitation, the people of Akrotiri had indoor plumbing. The rooms were spacious and light-filled thanks to large windows. And the walls were alive with color. The frescoes of Akrotiri are some of the most beautiful and well-preserved artworks from the ancient world. They are our window into the lives, beliefs, and environment of these long-lost people. One famous fresco shows a vibrant procession of ships, perhaps celebrating a naval festival or a successful trade mission. We see men and women in elaborate clothing, suggesting a rich and hierarchical society. Other frescoes depict scenes from nature: playful blue monkeys leaping across rocks, graceful antelopes, and swallows darting through a sky filled with red lily. These weren't just decorations. They were celebrations of life, a testament to a people deeply connected to the world around them. They show a society at peace, with no scenes of warfare or conquest. It seems Akrotiri was a prosperous hub of trade and culture, not a military fortress. The city's wealth likely came from its strategic position in the Aegean Sea. It was a crucial stop on the trade routes connecting Minoan Crete to mainland Greece, the Near East, and Egypt. Evidence found at the site, like pottery from other regions and the high quality of local crafts, points to a cosmopolitan center where goods and ideas flowed freely. The people were skilled sailors, farmers, and artisans, enjoying a standard of living that was exceptional for their time. Life was good on Thera. It was a sun-drenched, peaceful, and prosperous world. But the very ground beneath their feet, the source of the island's fertile soil, was also its greatest threat. Thera wasn't just an island. It was the tip of a massive, active volcano. For generations, it had been dormant, a sleeping giant that the Minoans likely took for granted. But deep within the earth, magma was accumulating, pressure was building, and the giant was beginning to stir. The first signs of trouble would have been small tremors, subtle shakes that might have been dismissed at first. But they grew stronger and more frequent. The ground would have shuddered, perhaps causing minor damage to buildings and unsettling the population. This is where the story takes a fascinating turn. Archaeologists excavating Akrotiri have found something remarkable: a city almost entirely devoid of human remains and valuable, portable objects. No skeletons crushed under rubble, no hoards of gold or precious jewelry left behind in haste. Instead, they found piles of debris from collapsed buildings that had been cleared and stacked, ready for rebuilding. They found large storage jars, too heavy to carry, but most smaller, valuable items were gone. This evidence paints a picture not of a sudden, chaotic catastrophe, but of an organized, phased evacuation. The initial earthquakes likely served as a powerful warning. The people of Akrotiri, recognizing the danger, made a collective decision to leave. They gathered their most precious belongings, their families, and they abandoned their beautiful city. They didn't flee in a panic. They left with the intention, perhaps, of one day returning after the danger had passed. They tidied up the damage, hoping to rebuild their homes. But they would never return. After the people left, the volcano entered its final, cataclysmic phase. The eruption of Thera, around 1600 BCE, was an event of almost unimaginable power. It's estimated to have been many times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883, a colossal column of ash, gas, and rock shot miles into the sky, blotting out the sun and turning day into night across the Aegean. The heart of the island collapsed into the empty magma chamber below, creating the vast, sea-filled caldera we see today. The paradise island of Thera was literally blown apart. The eruption triggered enormous tsunamis that radiated across the Mediterranean, slamming into the coast of nearby Crete, the heartland of the Minoan civilization. These waves would have devastated coastal towns, destroyed fleets, and inundated fertile farmland with salt water. The massive ash cloud plunged the region into darkness for days, causing a volcanic winter that would have led to crop failures and widespread famine. The eruption didn't just destroy one city, it crippled an entire civilization. While the Minoan culture lingered for a time, this single event is widely seen as the beginning of its decline, paving the way for the rise of the Mycenaeans on the Greek mainland. Back on what was left of Thera, a thick blanket of volcanic ash and pumice, dozens of meters deep, rained down upon the abandoned city of Akrotiri. This deadly fallout entombed the city, preserving it perfectly in a time capsule. For over 3.5 millennia, the vibrant frescoes, the multi-story buildings, and the advanced water systems lay hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. It is this volcanic blanket that protected Akrotiri, allowing us to see it today in such incredible detail, earning it the nickname the Minoan Pompeii. So what happened to the people? This is the enduring mystery. Did they successfully sail to Crete, only to be caught in the tsunamis that followed? Did they find refuge on other islands? We simply don't know. No mass graves have ever been found. Their fate remains one of history's great unsolved questions. They evacuated their city so successfully that they vanished from the archaeological record. The story of Akrotiri is a powerful reminder of the fragility of civilization in the face of nature's power. It's also a story that may have echoed through the ages. Some scholars believe that the memory of this cataclysm of powerful, advanced island civilization disappearing beneath the waves in a single day and night was passed down through generations, eventually reaching the Greek philosopher Plato, who transformed it into the legendary tale of Atlantis. While there is no direct proof, the parallels are striking. A lost paradise, a sophisticated culture, a cataclysmic end. Today, as tourists watch the sunset over Santorini's spectacular caldera, they're looking at the direct aftermath of that ancient disaster. The beauty of the present is built upon the ruins of a dramatic and tragic past. The story of Akrotiri is a tale of incredible life and sudden loss, of human ingenuity and the awesome power of our planet. It's a lost world, frozen in time, that continues to captivate our imagination. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to Bronze Age Thera. What part of this story do you find most fascinating? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more dives into the mysteries of the ancient world. See you next time. Imagine the Aegean Sea, a shimmering expanse of sapphire and turquoise, dotted with islands that look like jewels scattered by the gods. Among them, the island of Thera, known today as Santorini, basks in the Mediterranean sun. It's a picture of perfect tranquility, a paradise on earth. But beneath this serene surface, a giant is stirring. Deep within the Earth's crust, an ancient power is waking up, and the idyllic peace of the Minoan civilization is about to be shattered forever. This isn't just a story about a volcano. It's a story of a civilization on the brink and the subtle, terrifying signs that warned of the coming storm. The story begins not with a bang, but with a whisper, a tremor that shakes the very foundations of the world. At first it's just a slight shudder, barely noticeable. A farmer pauses in his field. A potter glances up from his wheel. Was that real? But soon the whispers become rumbles. The ground trembles more frequently, more violently. In the bustling city of Akrotiri, a jewel of Minoan culture, hairline cracks appear on the vibrantly frescoed walls of elegant buildings. Pottery, carefully arranged on shelves for centuries, rattles, teeters, and then crashes to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The earth groans, a deep, unsettling sound that seems to come from its very core. The people of Thera, accustomed to the occasional earthquake, start to realize this is something different, something far more sinister. The awakening has begun. As the ground continued to shake, other strange and disturbing phenomena began to appear across the island. The very lifeblood of the land, its water, started behaving erratically. Ancient wells that had quenched the thirst of generations suddenly ran dry, their depths turning to dust. In other places, new springs burst forth from the ground, bubbling with water that was unnaturally warm and smelled faintly of sulfur. The air itself grew thick with a sense of foreboding, an invisible tension that settled over the island like a shroud. Animals grew restless. Dogs barked at nothing, and livestock refused to settle. It was as if the entire natural world was holding its breath, waiting for a catastrophe it could sense, but not yet see. The signs were everywhere, a creeping dread that seeped into the daily life of the Therans. The Minoans were not a primitive people. They were a sophisticated and highly advanced maritime civilization, with a deep connection to the natural world. Their sailors navigated the Aegean by observing the stars, and their farmers lived by the rhythm of the seasons. They were keen observers, attuned to the subtle shifts and signals of their environment. So, as the world around them began to change, they paid attention. Priests and elders would have gathered, discussing the strange behavior of the birds, whose flight patterns had become frantic and unpredictable. Fishermen would report that the sea itself was acting strangely, with unusual tides and discolored patches of water appearing offshore. They may not have understood the complex geology at play, but their accumulated wisdom, passed down through generations, told them one thing with chilling certainty. Something was profoundly wrong. The island was sick, and its sickness was growing. Faced with these increasingly alarming signs, the Minoans of Thera made a remarkable decision. Instead of panicking or resigning themselves to fate, they organized. The evidence for this lies frozen in time in the excavated city of Akrotiri. Archaeologists digging through the layers of volcanic ash found a city almost perfectly preserved, but strangely empty. There are no human remains found within the main excavated areas, no skeletons caught in the final moments of destruction. What's more, the houses were systematically emptied of their most precious belongings. There are no gold treasures, no valuable imported goods, no personal keepsakes. This wasn't a panicked flight. It was an orderly planned evacuation. They'd packed their valuables, secured what they could, and left. The silent, empty streets of Akrotiri tell a powerful story of a community that saw the writing on the wall and chose survival. Imagine the scene at the ports of Thera. The harbors, usually bustling with trade and fishing vessels, are now a scene of organized urgency. Ships laden not with goods for trade, but with people, families clutching their most essential belongings. The destination? Crete, the heart of the Minoan civilization. A larger island to the south that promised safety. It was a journey of hope, but also of profound sadness. These people were leaving their homes, the land of their ancestors, possibly forever. As their ships pulled away from the shore, they would have looked back at their beautiful island, now a place of fear and uncertainty. They were refugees, cast out by the fury of the earth, sailing towards a future they couldn't predict, leaving behind a ghost town that awaited its final, fiery judgment. So, what was actually happening deep beneath their feet? Let's peel back the layers of the Earth to understand the immense forces at play. In the planet's mantle, a massive plume of molten rock or magma was rising. As this superheated material pushed upwards, it encountered the brittle crust of the Aegean sea plate. The pressure was immense. The rock fractured and cracked, creating pathways for the magma to ascend further. It pooled in a vast chamber just a few kilometers beneath the surface of Thera, a subterranean lake of fire. This magma chamber began to swell, like a balloon being inflated, pushing the ground above it upwards and causing the earthquakes and ground deformation the Minoans were experiencing. It was a geological time bomb, and the countdown had begun. It's fascinating to contrast how we would handle this situation today versus how the Minoans did. In the 21st century, we have an arsenal of technology. Satellites using GPS would detect the ground swelling by mere millimeters. A network of seismographs would record every tiny tremor, allowing scientists to map the movement of magma. Gas sensors would sniff the air for volcanic gases like sulfur dioxide, a key indicator of an impending eruption. We would have data, models, and precise warnings. The Minoans had none of this. They had only their five senses and their deep, intuitive understanding of the natural world. They felt the shaking of the earth. They saw the water levels change. They smelled the sulfur in the air and they watched the animals. Their wisdom, their collective experience was their early warning system, and incredibly, it worked. They understood the danger in a way that was primal and direct, and it spurred them to action. The evacuation was just in time. Shortly after the last ships likely departed, the volcano began to clear its throat. The initial phase of the eruption began, not with the main cataclysm, but with a series of preliminary explosions. These were likely what geologists call phreatic eruptions, caused by the superheated magma coming into contact with groundwater. The result would have been terrifying. Massive steam explosions would have rocketed from the volcano's peak, hurling rocks and ash into the air. A dark column of ash would have begun to rise miles into the sky, casting a dark shadow over the abandoned island. For anyone watching from the sea or neighboring islands, it would have been a horrifying spectacle. The sky above Thera, once a brilliant blue, was now turning a sickly gray, a prelude to the darkness to come. As day turned to night, the true horror of the situation would have become visible. The dark ash column rising from the island would have been illuminated from within by a terrifying, otherworldly light. The glow of the magma, the volcanic fire from the heart of the earth, would have lit up the night sky, turning the clouds of ash into a flickering, demonic canvas. Lightning would have cracked and flashed within the turbulent plume, a storm within a storm. This was the overture, the opening act of nature's most violent performance. The preliminary eruptions were a fireworks display from hell, a final, dramatic warning. The Minoans who had escaped could only watch from a distance, knowing their world was being unmade. They were safe for now, but they were witnessing the beginning of the end. The main event, the cataclysm that would reshape the Aegean and echo through history, was yet to come. Thank you so much for watching. If you are fascinated by the story of ancient civilizations and the powerful forces of nature that shaped our world, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have many more journeys into the past planned for you. See you in the next video. Imagine a paradise island, a bustling Bronze Age city with stunning art, paved streets, and multi-story homes. Now imagine it all vanishing in a matter of days, buried under a mountain of ash. This isn't a myth. It's the real story of Thera, a volcanic eruption so colossal it may have inspired the legend of Atlantis. Today, we're digging deep into the science behind one of history's most catastrophic natural disasters. Most people think of volcanoes and picture the gentle, glowing lava flows you see in Hawaii. These are called effusive eruptions, where runny, basaltic magma oozes out, creating new land. They're spectacular, but you can usually outwalk them. The eruption that destroyed Thera, now known as the beautiful Greek island of Santorini, was a completely different beast. It was a Plinian eruption, named after Pliny the Younger, who documented the similar eruption of Vesuvius that buried Pompeii. These are the titans of the volcanic world, explosive and unimaginably powerful. So, what makes an eruption like Thera so violently explosive compared to one in Hawaii? The secret lies in the magma's chemistry. Hawaiian volcanoes are fed by basaltic magma. It's low in silica, making it very fluid like warm honey. Gases like water vapor and carbon dioxide can escape from it easily, like bubbles rising in a soda can you open slowly. This steady release of pressure prevents a massive buildup, resulting in those relatively calm lava flows. Thera's magma, however, was rhyolitic and acidic. This type of magma is rich in silica, which acts like a thickener, making it incredibly viscous, more like cold peanut butter. This sticky, thick magma traps dissolved gases under immense pressure deep within the earth. Think of it like shaking a can of soda vigorously. The gas is desperate to get out, but the liquid is holding it in. When a crack finally forms in the rock above the magma chamber, it's like popping the tab on that shaking can. The pressure is released catastrophically. The gases explode out of the solution, fragmenting the thick magma into tiny shards of volcanic glass, rock, and crystals. This mixture, known as tephra, is blasted miles into the sky at supersonic speeds. In the case of Thera, the eruption column is estimated to have reached a staggering 36 kilometers, or 22 miles high, punching deep into the stratosphere. At this height, winds grabbed the ash and pumice, carrying it across the eastern Mediterranean. Ash from Thera has been found in Turkey, Egypt, and on the seafloor of the Black Sea, giving us a sense of its immense scale. The first phase of the eruption would have been an eerie rain of pumice and ash, blanketing the island. This lightweight, porous rock would have fallen for hours, piling up meter by meter. It would have been terrifying, a constant gray snowfall blocking out the sun, the air thick with suffocating dust and the smell of sulfur. This initial pumice fall is what first buried the city of Akrotiri, a remarkably well-preserved Minoan settlement on the island. The weight of the falling pumice would have caused roofs to collapse, trapping anyone who hadn't already fled. But the worst was yet to come. As the massive eruption column towered over the island, gravity began to take its toll. Unable to support its own immense weight, the column collapsed back down onto the volcano's flanks. This triggered the most lethal phenomenon in a volcanologist's handbook, the pyroclastic flow. A pyroclastic flow isn't lava. It's a superheated, fast-moving avalanche of gas, ash, and rock, traveling at hurricane speeds, sometimes over 700 kilometers per hour. Temperatures inside these flows can exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius. They hug the ground, flowing like a fluid, incinerating and obliterating everything in their path. There is no outrunning them, no surviving them. They are the ultimate instrument of volcanic destruction. At Thera, multiple pyroclastic flows surged across the island, one after another. They filled valleys, raced over hills, and completely buried Akrotiri under dozens of meters of hot volcanic debris. The energy was so immense that these flows didn't even stop at the coastline. They traveled across the surface of the sea, boiling the water as they went, and slammed into the coasts of nearby islands like Crete, over 110 kilometers away. The impact on the Minoan civilization, a dominant maritime power based on Crete, would have been devastating. Their fleet may have been destroyed at sea, their coastal towns inundated by tsunamis generated by the eruption, and their crops ruined by the thick layer of ash that fell across the region. Back on Thera, the eruption was reaching its climax. So much magma had been violently ejected from the chamber deep beneath the island that the ground above it was now unsupported. The entire center of the volcano collapsed into the empty space below, a process called caldera collapse. Seawater rushed into the newly formed depression, creating the vast, iconic bay we see at Santorini today. This sudden displacement of water would have generated colossal tsunamis, radiating outwards and causing further destruction throughout the Aegean Sea. When the dust finally settled, the island of Thera was gone. In its place was a fragmented ring of islands surrounding a deep, water-filled caldera. The vibrant city of Akrotiri was entombed, frozen in time like Pompeii, but over 1,000 years earlier. What's incredible is that archaeologists excavating Akrotiri have found no human remains and very few portable valuables. This suggests the inhabitants received some warning, perhaps from preliminary earthquakes or smaller, initial steam eruptions, and managed to evacuate the island before the cataclysmic final phase began. Where they went and what became of them remains a mystery. The eruption of Thera was a civilization-altering event. It plunged the region into darkness, triggered climatic changes, and likely contributed to the decline of the sophisticated Minoan civilization. It serves as a powerful reminder of the immense forces at play beneath our feet. By studying the layers of ash and pumice left behind, scientists have pieced together this story of destruction second by second, revealing the intricate physics and chemistry that turned a paradise island into a volcanic wasteland. The beauty of Santorini today is born from the ashes of one of the most violent geological events in human history. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the volcano. If you found this exploration of Thera's anatomy of destruction fascinating, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the science and history that shape our world. See you next time. The pyroclastic currents that scoured Thera's surface were merely symptoms of a deeper transformation occurring beneath the island. As cubic miles of magma erupted into the atmosphere, the chamber that had held this molten rock was rapidly emptying. Nature, as always, abhors a vacuum. What followed was a collapse so profound that it would literally reshape the geography of the Aegean Sea. The mechanics of caldera formation are now well understood through studies of similar events at Krakatau, Mount Mazama, and other locations where volcanic peaks have disappeared into themselves. As magma evacuates from the chamber below, the overlying rock loses its support. Initially, this occurs through incremental settling and fracturing. But there comes a point, a threshold, where incremental failure transforms into catastrophic collapse. At Thera, this threshold was crossed decisively. The central portion of the island, perhaps as much as 30 square miles, simply ceased to exist as land. In a sequence that may have unfolded over hours or days, the surface subsided into the emptying magma chamber below. The collapse was not uniform, but occurred in massive blocks, some remaining partially intact even as they descended hundreds of feet. The geological term is piecemeal caldera collapse, but the terminology fails to capture the violence of the event. Each major block failure would have generated its own seismic shock, an earthquake of magnitude 6 or greater. These were not the warning tremors that preceded the eruption, but massive jolts that would have been felt across the entire eastern Mediterranean. In Crete, buildings already stressed by ashfall and earlier seismic activity would have suffered new damage. In coastal areas, the ground shaking itself was dangerous, but it was the secondary effect that would prove most catastrophic. When massive amounts of land collapse into the sea, or when the sea rushes into a newly formed caldera, the water itself becomes a weapon. Displacement on this scale generates tsunami waves that radiate outward in all directions at speeds comparable to commercial aircraft. In the open ocean, these waves are barely noticeable, perhaps a few feet in height, but possessing wavelengths measured in miles. It is only when they approach shore, when the ocean floor rises to meet them, that their true destructive potential manifests. The tsunami generated by Thera's caldera collapse, or more accurately, the series of tsunamis generated by multiple collapse events, would have struck Crete's northern coast with devastating force. Modern computer modeling, calibrated against geological evidence of tsunami deposits, suggests wave heights upon landfall ranging from 30 to over 100 feet in certain locations. These walls of water traveled inland with the momentum of the entire ocean behind them. Coastal settlements, harbors, ships, all were swept away or smashed beyond recognition. The Minoan maritime infrastructure, so carefully developed over centuries, was destroyed in a matter of hours. Palaces near the coast suffered catastrophic damage. Agricultural land was inundated with seawater, rendering it infertile for years. The archaeological record from Minoan Crete shows clear evidence of this destruction. A distinct layer of pumice and volcanic material, sometimes mixed with marine deposits, marking the moment when the sea invaded the land. But the tsunamis did not stop at Crete. Wave energy propagated across the Mediterranean, striking coastlines hundreds of miles from Thera. The eastern coast of mainland Greece, the islands of the Dodecanese, the western coast of Turkey, the Levantine shore all experienced the ocean's fury. In Egypt, Nile delta settlements would have witnessed the sea rising impossibly, flooding areas that had never known such inundation. The human cost of these tsunamis can only be imagined. Unlike the residents of Thera, who had warning and evacuated, coastal populations throughout the region had no reason to expect disaster. The eruption column would have been visible, certainly a terrifying spectacle on the northern horizon. But the connection between a volcanic eruption 70 or 200 miles away and the sudden, murderous rising of the sea would not have been obvious to Bronze Age observers. Even as the tsunamis radiated outward, the transformation of Thera itself continued. The caldera that formed was roughly 6 miles in diameter, with cliffs rising hundreds of feet from the new seafloor to the remnants of the island's rim. What had been a roughly circular island with a central peak was now a crescent-shaped fragment surrounding a flooded abyss. The smaller islands of Thracia and Aspronisi, still visible today, are additional fragments of the original island, separated by the collapse. The volume of material displaced is staggering to contemplate. Estimates based on the thickness of ash deposits throughout the region and the size of the caldera itself suggest that Thera ejected between 14 and 20 cubic miles of material. To put this in perspective, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which captivated the world with its violence, ejected approximately 1/4 of a cubic mile. Krakatau in 1883, whose explosion was heard 3,000 miles away, ejected roughly 5 cubic miles. Thera was in a different category entirely, comparable only to the greatest eruptions in human history. The eruption's place in the volcanic explosivity index, a logarithmic scale developed in the 1980s. Imagine a world painted in vibrant colors, a civilization thriving on the sun-kissed island of Crete. This was the Minoan civilization, a maritime powerhouse, a beacon of art and culture in the Bronze Age. But around 1600 BC, the world turned gray. From the north, a catastrophic event was about to unfold, one that would change the course of history forever. This is the story of a paradise lost, of a civilization brought to its knees not by war, but by the fury of nature. Our story begins with the Thera eruption, one of the largest volcanic explosions in human history. The island we now know as Santorini, then a single landmass called Thera, was home to a thriving Minoan outpost, Akrotiri. When the volcano erupted, it blasted billions of tons of rock, ash, and gas into the stratosphere. The immediate effect was devastating for Thera. but the long-term consequences would ripple across the Aegean, with Crete lying directly in its path. For the Minoans on Crete, the first sign of disaster wasn't a tremor or a wave, but a terrifying twilight. The sky, once a brilliant blue, darkened as a colossal plume of volcanic ash drifted south. This wasn't ordinary dust. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of pulverized rock and glass. Picture it. A silent, gray snowfall descending upon the lush Minoan landscape. The vibrant green of the olive groves, the lifeblood of their economy, was smothered under a gray shroud. Fields of barley and wheat were buried, their stalks collapsing under the weight. This ash was more than just an inconvenience. It was a poison. It contaminated everything it touched. Rivers and streams, the primary sources of drinking water, turned into a gritty, toxic sludge. Livestock that grazed on the ash-covered vegetation fell ill and died. The delicate ecosystem that had sustained the Minoans for centuries was thrown into chaos. The very air they breathed became sharp and abrasive, a constant reminder of the invisible catastrophe unfolding around them. The psychological impact must have been immense. To a people who revered nature, whose art was filled with lily, dolphins and bulls, this gray, lifeless world must have felt like a divine punishment, a sign that the gods had abandoned them. But the ashfall was only the beginning. The collapse of the Thera volcano into the sea generated a series of gargantuan tsunamis. For the northern coast of Crete, the island's economic and political heartland, this was the death blow. Imagine standing on a hillside overlooking a bustling Minoan port. The harbor is filled with their iconic ships, vessels that connected Crete to Egypt, the Levant, and the Greek mainland. Suddenly, the sea pulls back, exposing the seabed in an eerie, unnatural silence. Then on the horizon, a dark line appears, growing rapidly into a monstrous wall of water. This wasn't just a large wave. It was a force of unimaginable power. The tsunami, perhaps reaching heights of over 30 meters, slammed into the coastline. It didn't just flood the harbors. It obliterated them. Ships were tossed inland like toys, smashing against buildings and each other. Coastal towns, warehouses filled with goods, and the vital shipyards that built their fleet were scoured from the landscape. The intricate network of coastal settlements, the nodes of the Minoan trade empire, were simply erased. This single event severed Crete from the outside world, crippling its ability to trade, to import essential materials like tin and copper, and to project its naval power. In the heart of the island, the magnificent palace of Knossos stood tall. Its labyrinthine corridors and vibrant frescoes were untouched by the waves. From a distance, it might have seemed that the center of Minoan power had survived. But a palace is not just stone and paint. It's the hub of a complex system. And that system was now broken. The palace was an administrative center that relied on a steady flow of tribute and goods, from the surrounding countryside and from its overseas network. With the farms failing due to the ash and the ports destroyed by the tsunami, the flow of resources dried up. The sophisticated bureaucracy, which tracked every jar of olive oil and every bushel of grain, now had nothing to count. The economic engine of the Minoan civilization had seized. The intricate redistribution system that ensured stability and prosperity collapsed. Famine and social unrest would have been the inevitable result. The authority of the rulers at Knossos, once seemingly absolute, began to crumble. They were kings of a palace but no longer of an empire. Into this power vacuum stepped a new force, the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. These were a more militaristic, ambitious people, and they had long been in the shadow of the sophisticated Minoans. Now they saw their opportunity. The transition wasn't likely a single, massive invasion, but a more gradual process of infiltration and influence. With the Minoan navy gone, Mycenaean ships could sail the Aegean uncontested. We see the evidence of this shift in the archaeological record. A new script appears on Crete, Linear B, for centuries. The Minoans had used their own unique and still undeciphered writing system. Linear A, the arrival of Linear B, an early form of the Greek language, signifies a change in administration. Greek-speaking administrators were now in charge, organizing the remnants of the Minoan economy for their own benefit. Mycenaean-style weapons and burial practices start to appear, indicating a new warrior elite taking control. The art and architecture begin to change, blending Minoan elegance with Mycenaean rigidity. The vibrant, flowing nature scenes of Minoan frescoes are gradually replaced by more formal, martial themes. Crete was no longer the master of its own destiny. It was becoming a province of the burgeoning Mycenaean world. Over the next few centuries, the distinct Minoan culture faded, absorbed into the rising tide of Mycenaean Greece. The memory of this great peaceful civilization, however, was never entirely lost. It lingered in myths and legends. The story of a powerful island kingdom, rich in culture and wealth, that suddenly vanished beneath the waves, became a cornerstone of Mediterranean folklore. Does this sound familiar? A sophisticated civilization, an island paradise, destroyed by a cataclysm and sinking into the sea. It is this very folk memory that many scholars believe was the seed for Plato's famous story of Atlantis. While Plato placed his mythical city in the Atlantic, the parallels to the Minoan collapse are striking. The Thera eruption and its aftermath provided the perfect real-world template for the legend of a great civilization lost to the wrath of the sea. The sinking of Thera, the destruction of Minoan Crete, it all coalesced into a powerful myth that has captivated us for millennia. So, when we look at the ruins of Knossos or the exquisite artifacts left behind by the Minoans, we are not just looking at a lost civilization. We are witnessing the echoes of a real-life cataclysm, a tragedy so profound that it rippled through time, inspiring one of the most enduring legends in human history. The fall of the Minoans is a stark reminder of the fragility of civilization and the immense power of the natural world. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as we do, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more historical deep dives, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We do love to hear what you think about the connection between the Minoans and the legend of Atlantis. Until next time, stay curious. The connection between Thera's eruption and Plato's account of Atlantis has captivated scholars and the public alike for more than a century. Could the story told by the Greek philosopher in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, preserve some distorted memory of the Minoan catastrophe that occurred more than 1,000 years before his time? The parallels are striking, yet the differences are equally significant, creating a puzzle that resists simple solutions. Plato describes Atlantis as a powerful island civilization that existed 9,000 years before his own time, a date that would place it around 9600 BCE, far too early to correspond with Thera. He writes of a circular island with concentric rings of land and water, of a sophisticated maritime power, of a civilization that ultimately sank into the sea in a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods. According to Plato, this story came to Athens through Solon, the great lawgiver, who had learned it from Egyptian priests during his travels. The chronological mismatch is substantial and cannot be easily dismissed. Yet many scholars have noted that Plato's description of Atlantis' physical geography bears uncanny resemblance to Thera before its caldera collapse. A circular island with a central mountain. Concentric zones of land and water, precisely what Thera's caldera creates today, though formed by destruction rather than construction. A civilization that valued maritime trade and artistic achievement. And most tellingly, an island that disappeared in a geological catastrophe involving earthquakes and inundation. One popular hypothesis proposes that Egyptian priests, from whom Solon supposedly learned the tale, had preserved garbled memories of the Theran eruption and Minoan decline. Egypt had extensive trade contacts with the Minoan world. Egyptian tomb paintings depict what appear to be Minoan traders and diplomats. Evidence of Theran ash has been found in the Nile Delta. The eruption and its aftermath would certainly have affected Egypt's Minoan trading partners, and such a memorable catastrophe might well have entered Egyptian historical memory. However, the transmission of this memory through 1,000 years of Egyptian record-keeping, then through Solon's imperfect understanding and translation, then through Plato's literary elaboration for philosophical purposes, would have transformed the original events beyond easy recognition. The multiplication of all dates by a factor of 10 turning 900 years into 9,000 could have resulted from confusion between different Egyptian numbering systems or calendar methods. But the Atlantis hypothesis, attractive as it is to popular imagination, represents only one strand of myth that might preserve memories of Thera's eruption. The Greek mythological tradition contains multiple stories that could potentially reference the catastrophe, though none can be definitively proven to do so. The legend of Deucalion's flood, the Greek version of a universal deluge, describes waters covering the earth and destroying civilization. While flood myths are nearly universal in human cultures and likely reflect multiple sources, It is possible that the tsunamis generated by Thera's caldera collapse contributed to or reinforced this mythological tradition in the Aegean world. More intriguingly, the story of Phaethon, the youth who lost control of the sun chariot, and scorched the earth before being struck down by Zeus, contains elements that might reflect volcanic memories. Ancient sources describe Phaethon's fall as accompanied by fire from the sky, rivers drying up, and widespread destruction. Could this myth preserve some garbled memory of volcanic ashfall and pyroclastic flows? The evidence is suggestive but far from conclusive. The mythology surrounding Crete itself, the labyrinth of the Minotaur, King Minos who controlled the seas, the palace of Knossos, may contain deeper historical truth than was once believed. When archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating Knossos in 1900, he discovered a palace of such complexity that labyrinthine seemed the only appropriate descriptor. The Linear B tablets revealed administrative systems of remarkable sophistication. Suddenly, the myths of Cretan power and palatial grandeur seemed less like pure fantasy and more like cultural memory. Yet we must be cautious about reading too much into mythological parallels. The human mind seeks patterns and connections. Ancient stories are multifaceted, serving religious, moral, and entertainment purposes that have nothing to do with preserving historical memory. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and tsunamis occurred throughout the ancient Mediterranean. Any given myth might reference multiple events or none at all, being instead pure imaginative creation. What the archaeological record demonstrates unequivocally is that memories of the Theran eruption did persist, at least in modified form for considerable periods. When the Greek colonists who resettled Thera in the 8th century BCE gave the island its name connecting it to Theras, their legendary leader, they were already building upon much older associations. The island's volcanic nature would have been visually obvious to anyone approaching it. The massive caldera, the colored cliffs of volcanic rock, the smaller islands that are clearly fragments of something once larger, these features would have demanded explanation. Local traditions on the islands surrounding Thera may have preserved the most accurate memories. Generations of sailors and fishermen, passing knowledge from father to son, might have maintained awareness that Thera had once been different, larger, that something catastrophic had occurred. These oral traditions would have existed below the level of written literature, in the practical knowledge of people who made their living from the sea. The phenomenon of cultural memory deserves consideration here. Anthropological studies of oral cultures have demonstrated that communities can maintain surprisingly accurate information about major events for many generations, though the information becomes progressively embedded in mythological frameworks. The Aboriginal Australians, for example, preserve in their oral traditions accurate information about coastal geography from periods when sea levels were significantly lower, information that is thousands of years old. Could Mediterranean sailors and islanders have maintained similar long-term memory of Thera's transformation? The answer is almost certainly yes, though the accuracy would degrade with each retelling and each generation. By the time such memories might have reached Egyptian priests, then Solon, then Plato, they would have been thoroughly mythologized, mixed with other stories, and adapted to serve the narrative purposes of each successive teller. What we can say with confidence is that the Theran eruption was spectacular enough, destructive enough, and consequential enough to deserve remembrance. A civilization was profoundly altered. The physical geography of the Aegean was permanently changed. The balance of power in the Bronze Age Mediterranean shifted. These are the kinds of events that enter cultural memory, that become the foundation for stories told across generations. Whether Atlantis is one of those stories remains ultimately unprovable. The connection is tantalizing but built on circumstantial parallels rather than definitive evidence. What the Atlantis hypothesis has accomplished, regardless of its historical validity, is to capture public imagination and focus attention on the genuine historical catastrophe that occurred at Thera, eruption that needs no mythological embellishment to qualify as one of the most significant natural disasters in human history. For more than 3,000 years, Thera kept its secrets. The island, known to modern Greeks as Santorini, attracted visitors for its dramatic beauty and unusual geography, but the sophisticated Bronze Age civilization buried beneath volcanic ash remained unknown. The story of how that buried world was rediscovered is itself a fascinating chapter in archaeological history, one that would revolutionize our understanding of the ancient Mediterranean. The first hints that something significant lay beneath Thera's surface emerged in the 1860s. During French construction of the Suez Canal, engineers needed pozzolana volcanic ash that, When mixed with lime, creates exceptionally strong hydraulic cement. Thera's abundant volcanic deposits seemed ideal. As workers quarried ash from the island, they began uncovering ancient walls and artifacts. These discoveries attracted minimal attention at the time. The ruins were assumed to be from the classical Greek period, interesting but hardly revolutionary. The true significance of these finds would not be recognized for decades. In 1870, French archaeologist Ferdinand Fouque conducted limited excavations and recognized that the buildings predated classical Greece, but the site was not systematically investigated. The Bronze Age Aegean was still poorly understood. The great Mycenaean sites of mainland Greece were just beginning to be explored. The very concept of a sophisticated pre-Hellenic civilization in the Aegean was still novel and controversial. The breakthrough in understanding Aegean prehistory came from Crete, not Thera. In 1900, British archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating at Knossos and uncovered the spectacular palace complex that would prove the Minoans had been far more than myth. Evans's work demonstrated that a highly sophisticated civilization had flourished in the Bronze Age Aegean, one that rivaled contemporary Egypt and Mesopotamia in artistic achievement and administrative complexity. The revelations from Knossos inevitably raised questions about Thera. If such advanced civilization existed on Crete, what might be buried on the neighboring island that had experienced such obvious volcanic catastrophe? But systematic excavation would have to wait. 2 world wars and shifting political circumstances delayed serious investigation. The modern archaeological story of Thera truly begins in 1967, when Greek archaeologist Spyridon Marinatos began systematic excavations at Akrotiri on the island's southern coast. Marinatos had a theory that he had been developing for decades, that the eruption of Thera had been responsible for the decline of Minoan civilization. His excavations were designed to test this hypothesis and to uncover the buried settlements that earlier sporadic finds had suggested existed. What Marinatos and his team uncovered exceeded even optimistic expectations. Beneath approximately 20 to 30 feet of volcanic ash and pumice lay an entire Bronze Age town, preserved with a completeness rarely seen in archaeology. Unlike most ancient sites where only stone foundations survive, Akrotiri retained buildings standing up to 3 stories high. The volcanic burial had been catastrophic for the ancient inhabitants, but proved ideal for archaeological preservation. The buildings themselves were remarkable. Multi-story structures with sophisticated architecture demonstrated urban planning and construction techniques that would not be seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years. Rooms were clearly differentiated by function. Staircases, some still intact, led to upper floors. Windows provided light and ventilation. The drainage system incorporated terracotta pipes that channeled waste and rainwater away from the buildings, a level of sanitation that medieval European cities would not achieve. But it was the art that truly captured global attention. Frescoes covered the walls of many buildings, depicting scenes of daily life, religious ritual, and the natural world with a vibrancy and sophistication that challenged assumptions about Bronze Age capabilities. The famous Boxing Boys fresco showed young athletes engaged in ritual combat. The Spring fresco presented a landscape of lily and swallows in colors that remained bright after more than 3 millennia. The Flotilla fresco depicted an entire fleet of ships traveling between settlements, providing invaluable information about Bronze Age maritime culture. These images were not primitive or stylized in the manner often associated with ancient art. They showed naturalism, attention to detail, and artistic sophistication that would not be out of place in much later periods. The figures moved with grace. The natural elements, flowers, birds, dolphins, were rendered with clear observation and appreciation. This was art created by a culture that had leisure time, resources to spare, and a worldview that celebrated beauty and nature. The artifacts recovered from Akrotiri complemented the artistic evidence. Pottery of exceptional quality, including imported pieces from Crete, demonstrated extensive trade networks. Storage vessels contained remnants of ancient foodstuffs, grain, legumes, even spices. Tools and equipment revealed technological sophistication in metallurgy, textile production, and other crafts. Religious objects suggested complex spiritual beliefs. Perhaps most significantly, what Marinatos did not find was as revealing as what he did find. Despite years of excavation covering a substantial portion of the ancient settlement, no human remains were discovered. No skeletons, no bodies caught in flight, no evidence of sudden death. Similarly, portable valuables were notably absent. No hoards of gold jewelry, no caches of precious metals, no valuable objects left behind in panic. This absence told a story as important as any artifact. The people of Akrotiri had received warning. They had time to evacuate systematically, taking their most precious portable possessions and, most importantly, escaping with their lives. This was not Pompeii, where people died where they stood. This was organized withdrawal in the face of recognized danger. The excavations also revealed evidence of the warning period. Buildings showed signs of earthquake damage that had been repaired before the final burial. Some repairs were incomplete, suggesting work in progress when final evacuation occurred. The stratigraphy, the layering of volcanic deposits, showed that the eruption occurred in multiple phases, with the earliest deposits consisting of fine ash that preceded the catastrophic pyroclastic flows and collapse events. Marnatos worked at Akrotiri until his death in 1974 when he fell from scaffolding at the excavation site. His successor, Christos Dumas, continued the work, expanding the excavated area and making additional spectacular discoveries. The excavations became increasingly sophisticated, incorporating modern techniques of preservation and analysis. The site itself was eventually covered by a protective roof structure, allowing work to continue in all weather while protecting the fragile remains from the elements. As more of Akrotiri emerged from the volcanic ash, the picture of Minoan life became increasingly detailed and nuanced. This was not a crude or primitive society, but one of remarkable sophistication. The architecture suggested social stratification: larger, more elaborately decorated buildings presumably belonging to wealthy or important families, smaller structures housing craftspeople and laborers. Yet even modest dwellings showed evidence of comfort and aesthetic concern that went beyond mere survival. The agricultural system supporting Akrotiri could be partially reconstructed from archaeobotanical evidence. Barley and wheat formed staple crops. Olives were cultivated for oil. Grapes were grown for wine. Lentils, chickpeas, and fava beans provided protein. The diversity of food sources suggested a sophisticated understanding of agriculture and a diet that was varied and nutritious. The broader implications of the Akrotiri excavations extended far beyond the site itself. Here was definitive proof that Bronze Age Aegean civilization had achieved a level of sophistication comparable to contemporary Egypt and Mesopotamia. The art alone would have been sufficient to revolutionize understanding of the period. Combined with the architecture, urban planning, and evidence of extensive trade networks, Akrotiri demonstrated that the Eastern Mediterranean in the mid-2nd millennium BCE was a complex, interconnected world of advanced civilizations. Thera did not die with its Bronze Age eruption. The volcano that created the caldera remains active today, a reality that modern volcanology monitors with sophisticated technology that would seem like magic to the ancient Minoans. Understanding how scientists watch over Santorini and similar volcanic systems provides insight into humanity's evolving relationship with geological forces that remain beyond our control but are no longer beyond our comprehension. The caldera itself is a laboratory for volcanic processes. Within the flooded basin, two dark islands rise from the waters, Pelea Kameni and Naa Kameni, the old and new burnt islands. These are not remnants of the ancient island, but entirely new volcanic structures that have emerged from the caldera floor through a series of eruptions over the past 2,000 years. The most recent significant activity occurred between 1925 and 1950, when a series of eruptions expanded Naa Kameni and created new land where previously there had been only sea. These modern eruptions, while dramatic to witnesses, are vastly smaller than the Bronze Age catastrophe. They represent the volcano's continuing but reduced activity, magma still rising from below but without the catastrophic explosive potential of its ancient predecessor. The magma chamber beneath Thera is rebuilding, refilling over geological timescales. But current estimates suggest it would require thousands of years to reach the critical volume and pressure that preceded the Bronze Age eruption. Modern volcanic monitoring at Santorini employs a comprehensive array of technologies, each designed to detect different aspects of volcanic unrest. Seismometers placed throughout the caldera and surrounding islands continuously record ground vibrations. Every earthquake, every tremor, no matter how small, is detected, located, and analyzed. These instruments can distinguish between tectonic earthquakes caused by regional plate movements and volcanic earthquakes caused by magma movement or hydrothermal activity within the volcanic system. GPS stations provide another layer of surveillance. These instruments measure ground deformation with millimeter precision. When magma accumulates in a chamber below, the overlying ground inflates, rising fractionally as the pressure increases. Conversely, when magma drains or pressure decreases, the surface subsides. By tracking these tiny movements across a network of stations, volcanologists can detect magma chamber inflation that might precede an eruption by months or years. Gas monitoring adds crucial information to the surveillance network. Volcanic gases, primarily water vapor, carbon dioxide, and sulfur dioxide, dissolve in magma under pressure, but are released as the magma rises and pressure decreases. By measuring gas composition and emission rates from fumaroles and hot springs in the caldera, scientists can detect changes in the volcanic system that might not yet be producing seismic signals or ground deformation. Satellite technology has revolutionized volcanic monitoring in recent decades. Radar interferometry, which compares sequential satellite images to detect ground movement, can measure deformation across the entire volcanic system with spatial coverage impossible to achieve with ground-based instruments alone. Thermal imaging from space can detect heat anomalies that might indicate magma approaching the surface. These satellite techniques are particularly valuable for volcanoes in remote locations. But even for well-instrumented sites like Santorini, they provide valuable, complementary data. The monitoring paid off dramatically in 2011-2012, when Santorini experienced its most significant volcanic unrest in decades. Seismometers detected increasing numbers of small earthquakes. GPS stations recorded ground inflation amounting to several centimeters, substantial movement by volcanic standards. Gas emissions increased. The entire monitoring network indicated that magma was indeed rising beneath the caldera, accumulating at depths of several miles below the surface. This episode provided a real-world test of modern volcanic crisis management. Volcanologists from Greece and international institutions analyzed the incoming data continuously. Threat assessments were prepared. Civil authorities were briefed. Contingency plans were reviewed. The global media descended on Santorini, and the tourism-dependent local economy watched nervously as scientists debated what the volcano might do next. What the volcano ultimately did was nothing, or more precisely, it returned to quiet after the magma intrusion stalled at depth without reaching the surface. The seismicity gradually decreased. The ground inflation stopped and partially reversed. The crisis, while real, did not evolve into an eruption. This outcome itself was scientifically valuable, demonstrating that volcanic unrest does not always lead to eruption and providing data on how Santorini's volcanic system behaves during magma movement events. The 2011 to 2012 episode illustrates both the power and the limitations of modern monitoring. The instruments detected the unrest clearly and provided detailed information about what was happening beneath the surface. Scientists could offer informed assessments of probabilities and potential scenarios, but they could not predict with certainty whether eruption would occur or what form it might take. Volcanology remains a science of probabilities, not certainties. This inherent uncertainty creates challenges for risk management. Santorini is not an uninhabited wilderness, but a popular tourist destination hosting thousands of visitors daily during peak season. The permanent population, while modest, has homes and livelihoods tied to the island. Authorities must balance the risk of unnecessary alarm against the danger of inadequate warning. The decision to evacuate or restrict access is never simple, especially when the economic costs of such actions are immediate and certain while the volcanic risk remains probabilistic. The lessons from Thera's Bronze Age eruption inform modern risk assessment. We know that this volcanic system is capable of catastrophic explosive eruptions that would devastate not only Santorini but surrounding islands and coastal areas. We know that such eruptions can occur with warning periods ranging from days to months. We know that the consequences, pyroclastic flows, ash fall, caldera collapse, tsunamis, would affect the entire eastern Mediterranean region. What we do not know is when the next major eruption might occur. The geological evidence suggests that catastrophic eruptions at Thera occur on timescales of tens of thousands of years. The Bronze Age eruption occurred approximately 3,600 years ago. The previous major eruption occurred roughly 21,000 years earlier. Statistical analysis of eruption frequency suggests that while another catastrophic event will eventually occur, the probability of it happening in any given human lifetime remains very low. Yet probability is not destiny. Low probability events do occur. The residents of Pompeii in 79 CE had no reason to expect that Mount Vesuvius, quiet within human memory, would suddenly explode. The people of Plymouth, Montserrat, in the 1990s lived peacefully on an island whose volcano had been dormant for centuries before it roared back to life, ultimately burying their capital city and forcing evacuation of much of the island. Modern monitoring cannot prevent volcanic eruptions, but it can provide the warning that was unavailable to most historical populations facing volcanic catastrophe. The residents of ancient Akrotiri had enough warning to evacuate and save their lives, but that warning came from direct observation of preliminary eruptions and increasing earthquakes. Modern populations have the advantage of instruments that can detect volcanic unrest long before it becomes obvious to human senses. The challenge is ensuring that this technological advantage translates into effective action when needed. Warning systems are only valuable if authorities and populations trust them and are prepared to act on them. Education, planning, and regular drills are as important as seismometers and GPS stations. The infrastructure of crisis response evacuation routes, emergency shelters, communication systems must be established and maintained during quiet periods so that it functions during crisis. Santorini today stands as both monument and warning. The spectacular beauty that attracts visitors from around the world is itself the product of volcanic catastrophe. The cliffs that visitors photograph are the walls of the caldera created when the island's center collapsed into the evacuating magma chamber. The striking contrast of white buildings against dark volcanic rock is a reminder that beauty and danger are not opposites, but often coexist in the same landscape. The eruption of Thera stands as more than a geological event or an archaeological curiosity. It represents a profound intersection of human civilization and natural forces, a moment when the Earth's deep processes reached the surface with consequences that rippled through history in ways both obvious and subtle. Understanding this event requires us to contemplate not only what happened, but what it means for our relationship with the planet we inhabit. The immediate human cost of the eruption, while impossible to quantify precisely, was almost certainly less catastrophic than it might have been. The evacuation of Akrotiri and presumably other settlements on Thera meant that the island's population survived, even if their homeland did not. This distinguishes Thera from later volcanic disasters like Pompeii, where thousands died, or the 1902 eruption of Mount Pelée in Martinique, where nearly 30,000 perished in minutes. The Minoans read the warning signs their world provided and acted accordingly. Yet the broader civilizational impact was profound and lasting. The decline of Minoan Crete, while not solely attributable to Thera's eruption, was certainly accelerated by it. The combination of ashfall, tsunamis, agricultural disruption, and the destruction of maritime infrastructure created conditions from which the civilization never fully recovered. The subsequent rise of Mycenaean power represented not merely a change of political players but a transformation of Aegean culture that would eventually lead to the classical Greek civilization we recognize today. In this sense, Thera's eruption becomes a pivot point in Mediterranean history. Had the volcano remained quiet, Minoan civilization might have continued to dominate the Aegean for centuries more. The cultural trajectory of the region might have evolved differently. The Greek civilization that emerged from the Bronze Age collapsed and eventually gave the world democracy. Philosophy and drama might have taken different forms or emphasized different values. These are counterfactual, unprovable alternatives, but they remind us that history is not inevitable but contingent, shaped by the unpredictable interaction of human choices and natural forces. The scientific legacy of studying Thera has proven equally significant. The eruption serves as a type example, a reference point for understanding explosive volcanism and caldera-forming events. When volcanologists discuss VI7 eruptions, they often reference Thera alongside Tambora and Krakatau. When they modeled tsunami generation from caldera collapse, Thera provides critical data. When they attempt to understand the atmospheric and climatic effects of major eruptions, Thera's impact on the mid-second millennium BCE climate offers important evidence. The archaeological investigation of Akrotiri has likewise transformed our understanding of Bronze Age society. The preservation of organic materials, architectural details, and especially the frescoes has provided insights into daily life, artistic achievement, and social organization that would be impossible to obtain from most archaeological sites. Every major museum exhibition on Bronze Age Aegean civilization features material from Akrotiri, and the site continues to yield new discoveries as excavation progresses. Beyond the academic contributions, Thera poses philosophical questions about humanity's relationship with natural forces. The Minoans built a sophisticated, cultured civilization on an active volcano without understanding the danger beneath their feet. They were not ignorant or primitive, but simply lacked the geological knowledge that would only develop millennia later. Their experience reminds us that every human society, no matter how advanced, remains subject to natural processes that operate on scales beyond individual human lifespans, or even civilizational memory. Modern civilization, despite our sophisticated monitoring and scientific understanding, faces similar vulnerabilities on a larger scale. We have identified numerous volcanic systems worldwide capable of eruptions, comparable to or exceeding Thera's. The Campi Flegrei caldera near Naples, Italy. Yellowstone in the United States. Toba in Indonesia, which produced a super eruption 70,000 years ago that may have nearly extinguished human populations globally. We can monitor these systems, but we cannot prevent their eventual reawakening. We can prepare and plan, but we cannot eliminate the risk. Climate change adds another dimension to this reflection. While volcanic eruptions are natural events that would occur regardless of human activity, our civilization's impact on Earth's climate represents a different kind of challenge, one where human choices directly influence planetary systems. The irony is that major volcanic eruptions cause temporary global cooling, while human greenhouse gas emissions cause warming. Both demonstrate that planetary systems can change dramatically, with consequences for human societies that depend on stable climate and environmental conditions. The Thera story also speaks to resilience and adaptation. The Minoan civilization declined but did not disappear without trace. Its cultural achievements, artistic traditions, and accumulated knowledge were absorbed by successor civilizations. Refugees from Crete may have carried Minoan culture to other parts of the Mediterranean. The linear A script, while still undeciphered, clearly influenced the development of linear B. The artistic motifs and architectural techniques evolved into new forms under Mycenaean and later Greek culture. This pattern catastrophe followed by transformation, rather than complete extinction, appears repeatedly in human history. Civilizations prove more resilient than we might expect. They adapt, migrate, rebuild, and incorporate their experiences into new cultural forms. The Roman city of Pompeii was destroyed, but Roman civilization continued and eventually dominated the Mediterranean world for centuries. When Mount Tambora erupted in 1815 with even greater force than Thera, it caused a year without summer that brought widespread crop failures and suffering. But human civilization persisted and indeed entered a period of unprecedented technological advancement in the following decades. What Thera ultimately teaches is humility. We are not separate from nature, but part of it. We live on a dynamic planet where continents drift, mountains rise, and volcanoes periodically remind us that the apparently solid earth beneath our feet is neither permanent nor stable. The Aegean Sea that today appears timeless and unchanging has been radically reshaped by geological forces within the span of recorded human history. Yet alongside humility should come appreciation. The same volcanic forces that destroyed Bronze Age Thera created the spectacular landscape that draws visitors today. The ash that buried Akrotiri preserved it for modern discovery. The eruption that disrupted one civilization contributed to the emergence of another. Destruction and creation, catastrophe and renewal, these are not opposites but different phases of the same planetary processes. As we contemplate Thera's story from our vantage point more than 3 millennia later, we might reflect on what endures. The Minoan palaces are ruins. The ships that commanded the Aegean have long since rotted away. The people who painted those vivid frescoes are dust. Yet the frescoes themselves survive, still capable of moving viewers with their beauty and vitality. The human impulse to create, to build, to make something beautiful and meaningful. This survives catastrophe and speaks across the millennia. Perhaps this is Thera's deepest lesson. We cannot control the earth. We cannot prevent volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, or tsunamis. We cannot guarantee that our civilizations will endure forever, or that our achievements will survive the forces of nature and time. But we can create meaning in the present. We can build with care and beauty. We can pursue knowledge and understanding. We can prepare as best we can for dangers we cannot prevent. The volcano that destroyed Bronze Age Thera still smolders beneath the blue waters of the caldera. It will erupt again someday, though perhaps not for thousands of years. When it does, modern monitoring will provide warning that the ancient Minoans could only dream of. But the fundamental equation remains unchanged. We share this planet with forces far greater than ourselves. The choice we face is not whether to accept this reality but how to live meaningfully within it, building, creating, and cherishing what we have while we have it, knowing that all human things are temporary but that the impulse to create and understand transcends any individual civilization as fate.